Hello and welcome to the Kaleidoscope Block of the Month. I'm Stephanie Subbing from Quilt Addicts Anonymous, and we're going to be making this Block of the Month pattern using Spotsy from QT Fabrics. Make sure you check out a local quilt shop near you to see if they are offering this reorderable line, or search on the internet if they don't have it near you. You can find lots of places that have it, and you can request that they do the Block of the Month, or you can grab the book from us or another retailer and order the fabrics you need to make this beautiful quilt. I love Kaleidoscope. It's one of the first Block of the Months that I ever created, and it is a really stunning design. We've changed it up a little bit for this version. There's no longer the outside border, so it's a little bit smaller quilt, but still definitely works for a king or queen size bed. And it is really stunning because it uses a lot of colors. It's good for those of you who really enjoy a good rainbow. So we're going to be going through the block tutorials and posting those at the beginning of each month. And so you guys are going to be able to follow along with that at your own pace. The videos are all available for free at academy.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. So you can follow along with it, whether you're participating on your own or with a QT Fabrics retailer. We're going to get started with block 1, and we're going to start with some easy strip piecing. The colors and the sizes are all available in the Kaleidoscope pattern. You can get that from a participating retailer or over at shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. We're going to start off with strip pieces from 2 of our focus fabrics and 2 of our background fabrics. And we're going to sew these guys right sides together using a 1/4 inch seam. And if you have never strip pieced before, or you're kind of iffy on your 1/4 inch seam, make sure to check out our beginner quilting tutorial series. It was actually sponsored by QT Fabrics. We've got a video in there on 3 ways to make sure you always sew a perfect 1/4 inch seam. All right, let's get started. So I'm using a machine with a 1/4 inch stitch. So what I've done is I have put that into my machine. So that way, when I use my standard presser foot, the needle is exactly a 1/4 inch away from the right side of the presser foot. So as long as I keep my fabric lined up with this, I'm going to be able to sew a perfect 1/4 inch seam. So we're going to start by placing our fabrics right sides together, and I've got everything lined up beautifully. If they are not the same width at this point, something has gone wrong. You want to measure and figure out what's going on. So what I do is I just kind of lift up, and then I make sure to line up my edges along the right side, and I just put my fingertip at the point. And what that does is it kind of keeps everything together without needing to pin. So once the feed dogs have pulled my fabric and fingertips up to the presser foot, then it's time to do the same thing again. And it's not always this dramatic of a lift. Most of the time I'm just kind of lining it up and letting it go, but this is a great way to strip piece without having to pin the entire way down. So you're just going to follow that procedure until you reach the end of your piece. Once you've reached the end, a great way to save time in your quilting is to chain piece. So I've got my next strip set ready to go. I'm just going to feed it under, leaving a little bit of space in between the 2, and I'm going to start sewing. So the feed dogs are going to pull that under and start stitching, and then I can go ahead and stitch down to do my second piece. And it saves you thread and it saves you time when you're quilting. Now we're going to press our strip piece units open. It was actually when I was making Kaleidoscope for the first time many, many years ago that I converted from pressing seams under the dark side to pressing the seams open. I found that when I was quilting it, it made for a lot better flatter seams, and also for strip piecing it helps keep a really nice straight seam instead of eventually kind of having a curve, which can sometimes happen. So to press the seams open, what you're going to do is you're going to finger press it open to start. Then you're going to put the tip of your iron straight down that center seam, and I kind of keep 3 or 4 fingers ahead of the iron, finger pressing that open as I go. This gets easier to do once you've done it a few times. The first couple times though, it can be a little awkward. And you can see how flat and nice that seam is, and then also how straight it is, which is exactly what we want when we're strip piecing. I'm going to continue going down the rest of the way. Now, one thing I like to do is also press from the front side. And one thing to look for when you're pressing your seams open is to make sure that this is nice and straight. If you see a wiggle anywhere, especially on this side, it means there's probably a pleat somewhere on the other side. And this really nice straight seam is going to be absolutely fantastic when we go to cut things apart, as we're not going to have where things can kind of get off and the wrong size and angle as we cut apart our strip piece unit to make our 4 patches. All right, so now we're going to trim this apart. What it does is it makes it a lot faster, because instead of cutting a million tiny little squares and then sewing those together to make 4 patches, we're able to sew 2 long strips of fabric together, cut those apart into essentially what's already a twosie, and then we're able to sew that together to get our 4 patch. Makes everything go a lot faster. But there are some tips to making sure that everything is nice and square so that you get great results that I'm going to share with you right now. So in this case, we're going to be cutting it to 2.5 inches. So we want to make sure that our selvage is hanging off beyond that just a little bit, as we're going to overcut for our first one. The other thing I want to do is make sure that any inch line is on this seam. That's what's going to make sure I've got a 90-degree angle right here. If I were to have it off like this, then I would not have a 90-degree angle, and I wouldn't have squares. I would have some weird shaped trapezoid going on here. So you always want to make sure that any inch line is going straight across that seam, and that you've got at least the amount that you need to cut to on the left side for that first cut. So once I'm happy with that, I'm going to go ahead and give my first cut. Then I'm going to flip that around, and we're going to now square up our selvage edge. This only needs to happen on the first cut or if you get off. So now for these future cuts, what we're going to do is just go ahead and continue cutting on. So the measurement I need to cut to in this case is 2.5. I've got my inch line right on that seam, so I have a nice 90-degree angle here, and now I'm able to trim. Now I'm going to show you what to do if you get off. Let's say your ruler slipped, your rotary cutter slipped, or maybe your seam just wasn't straight. Something like this might happen. Now, when we go to line this up, you can see that if I were to follow 2.5 with my cut edge, you can see that I have absolutely no hope of lining up that inch line on my seam, which is really critical to having that 90-degree angle. So what you want to do is essentially overcut again, like we did at the beginning with our selvage. So what you're going to do is you're going to line up your inch line still on that center seam. That's your most important guide to keep in contact with. And then you want to make sure, in this case it's 2.5, is beyond the shortest part. So we can see we've got 2.5 there, and down here it's past 3, but that's okay. We're just going to lose that. So now I can go ahead and cut. We're going to flip it around, square it up. And now we're ready to proceed as normal. Now I'm going to do the same thing with my purple and blue strip set unit. So now we're ready to join these together to create our 4 patch. I'm going to go ahead and turn it so that way the seam I'm pinning is parallel to my body. I find it a lot easier to work that way. So what we're going to do is we're going to flip everything right sides together, and then we're going to look at it from the top. So when you have your seams pressed open like this, it's really easy to tell where everything is at. What you want to do is make sure that your seams are right on top of each other like this. And when you have a dark on one side and a bright color on the other like we do here, it's really easy to tell what's what. Now what I like to do is pin in the right side of the seam allowance, right where I'm going to be sewing. That way when I'm stitching, I've held it together within the 1/4 inch seam allowance that I'm going to be using. So that way I can sew all the way down, stop with my needle down in the first half of that seam allowance, then remove my pin, because that needle down is going to act like a pin and hold everything together, and then stitch the rest of the way. If you have a little bit of variance on how wide your strips are, like I do with this one, this blue is just a smidge longer than the purple, no big deal. Just line up those corners as you're working and give it a little bit of a little tug just to even that out, and no one will be able to tell when everything is said and done. Now I'm going to line up my top 2 corners, and I'm going to go ahead and stitch until I reach that first seam allowance, and we'll stop at that needle down, and only then do I pull the pin. Now I'm going to line up these last 2 corners and stitch the rest of the way down. I'm going to chain piece the rest of my 4 patches as well. It's just going to speed up the whole block construction process. We're going to press this seam open as well. It's like when we did the strip piecing, only we have a lot smaller area to go to. And also we want to make sure that we're lifting and pressing when we go over that seam. That way we don't accidentally press anything going in the opposite direction. You can see how great and flat that seam join looks. It's going to make for a really flat quilt block and really open up your possibilities when it comes to quilting. And you can see when I flip it over to the right side that that join is absolutely fantastic. I'm going to press from this side as well just to get it really nice and flat. I find the combination of the liso and the wool pressing mat really is fabulous. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and press the others, and then we're going to move on to the picket fence units. For the next step, we're going to mark the wrong side of the long side of our triangles that are going to go on our picket fence units. If you have a corner clipper, you could use that to clip off the corners so that way you can position it perfectly. This is another option if you don't want to go buy another tool. Sometimes when you're marking the back of a darker fabric, it's good to have a couple of different marking tools on hand. Here I have a mechanical pencil, just a regular one. I've got a sew line pencil, which has white lead in it, and I have a friction gel pen. All of them work differently on different colors of fabric, and so you might find that you're able to see one better than another. What I'm going to do to start, I'm going to start with that mechanical pencil. I like to use mechanical pencils, by the way, because it's always a nice thin line as opposed to regular pencils, which can get a little fat. So I'm lining up the 1/4 inch line of my ruler with that long edge of the fabric, and because this is a bias, I don't want to stretch out, I'm very lightly marking across there, starting from the center out. That way I can get a nice line on here that didn't stretch my fabric and keep it out of whack. Now I'm going to repeat that for all my other triangles. Now we're going to take our triangles that we marked and the rectangles that are blue and green, and we're going to put them right sides together, but it matters where we arrange that line. So what I'm going to do is I'm arranging the tip of the line with the tip of my corner. And when you do that, the tip of the bottom line should also be arranged with the outside corner of your rectangle. And you're going to do the same thing with your green piece, just everything is going to be orientated opposite, so that way these form picket fence units when we put everything together. Now, if you want to pin because you think that that will help you hold it in place, that is absolutely a thing you can do. I'm going to go ahead and put a pin in kind of at the top here, going across that seam, and it's far enough in to where this is going to stay put where the line meets the corner, but I'll be able to get a good start on sewing before I have to remove the pin. Then what I can do is I can line up my bottom, and I can put my second pin in also kind of toward that bottom like that. I find that felt mat is quite helpful for that because I can kind of poke down into it. That way things aren't shifting on me and everything can go together pretty well. Alternatively, if you have a corner clipper and you want to clip off the corners of your triangle, then you're going to be able to match up the top of the triangle and the bottom of the triangle with your piece. But if you don't have an extra tool and you don't want to buy one, this is a great alternative. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and sew right on that line that I drew, and we're going to chain piece all of these through. I'm only going to pin the ones that I showed you here on camera. The rest I am going to line up as I go because I've done this type of thing before. But if you feel more comfortable pinning every single one, go ahead and do that. Now, whenever I'm sewing on top of a line, what I like to do is move my needle back to that center position. I find it easier just to kind of hang on to it at that point and keep everything where I would like it to be. This is another great opportunity for chain piecing. Especially if your sewing machine tends to eat fabric, this is a great way to avoid that. Once you've got everything sewed together, go ahead and arrange your ruler so that the edge of it is even with the long side of that triangle. Then what we're going to do is we're going to give ourselves our 1/4 inch seam by trimming off the edge of that triangle on the rectangle. From here, we're ready to press it open and sew everything together. When pressing open, we are working with a bias seam, so you just want to be careful when you're pressing it open to make sure you're not stretching everything out of place and to make sure that you're keeping everything still nice and straight. That's where you could potentially have problems. But here we are, we're ready to go. This top is a little off, but it'll be fine. We'll be able to work that in when we sew everything together to make our block. Now it's time to join our picket fence units together. If you want, you can clip off your little dog ears, or if you use a corner clipper, you won't have them. It will reduce the amount of bulk when you go to sew it together and quilt it later, but it's also okay to leave them. What we're going to do is we're going to arrange these right sides together, and I'm going to turn it so the side I'm pinning is parallel to my body and facing away from me. Now I'm still going to line these up so that the seams are on top of each other. It's a little trickier because we're working on the diagonal here, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to pin on the diagonal as well, going into that seam allowance, following the right side of that again. Now, it's not uncommon for the top of your picket fence units to be a slightly different size, and in this case I'm actually hanging out a little bit further on here. What I'm going to do when I sew this together is it's most important that this seam is on top of each other, because that's what people are going to see when you put it together. The rest of it, what I'm going to do, and I'll just pin it together so you can see how it works here, is I'm going to line up my top corners and my bottom corners, and I'm just going to give it a little bit of tension as I sew through there, so that way those corners end up as close together as possible, and once we press that open, we won't be able to tell that we eased in a little bit of fabric, and it'll be okay. This one, the green, might ultimately end up hanging off a little bit because there's a little extra to ease in there, but if you kind of just give it a little bit of tension, you can see how that kind of flattens out, and it'll all look totally normal once we sew it together. I'm going to go ahead and pin the rest too, so that way I can chain piece to get these completed. Make sure you move your stitch setting back to a 1/4 inch seam if you moved it to the center earlier like I did. Now what you're going to do is you're going to line up with those corners together and get started. And we're going to keep stitching until we hit the first half of that seam allowance. Now I'm going to stop with the needle down in that first landed seam allowance, and only now am I going to remove the pin. Now this is the one where I had the most to ease in, which is why I'm working with that. I'm kind of pulling the fabric a little bit off to the side so that it flattens out along the edge where I'm working. And I'm just giving that a teeny little bit of tension with my fingertip. I'm going to kind of flatten it out as I go in. Move that pin. And those corners are ending up pretty close to where they should be. Anything else I can ease in when I'm putting my block together. Now we're going to press this seam open as well. For this one, I kind of like to finger press the whole thing. And you really want to lift and press because it's really easy to press some of these going in the opposite direction. So you just want to lift the whole thing up. We can already see that we've got a great join here. And when I flip it over, I can see that that V is absolutely perfect. We don't have one up or down from the other. If you do, it's not the end of the world, but you can absolutely make it work. Now, when I turn this so that it's the way it's going to be, we can see that the green is just a teeny bit lower on this side, but that's going to be okay. We'll be able to ease that in as we put our block together. I'm going to press the rest of these open, then we're ready to assemble our block. This is the one that I eased in a little bit on the bottom. You cannot tell at all anymore that there's extra fabric in this green side than there is in the teal. It all looks great. All right, I've got all of my units that we made plus center background block laid out. And the wonderful thing about this block is we don't have any points to match at this point because this doesn't match with anything in the center, same down here. So for the first pass anyway, when we sew it into horizontal rows, we don't really have to pin anything. We can just sew it together. Everything should be nice and square and good to go. And if not, just do that little easing trick and it'll work out. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this into horizontal rows, and then we're going to press it open. We're going to press these seams open as well. Again, make sure you're doing a lot of lifting and pressing so that we don't press any of these open seams closed. We want them to stay open so that we can have a fabulously flat block. When I'm done, I'm also going to press from the right side, get that row nice and flat. All right, so we've got our horizontal rows together. Now it's time to join them to complete the block. I'm going to start by joining my top row to my middle row. This process is really similar to when we were joining our 4 patches in terms of how we pin this. I'm going to go ahead and flip those right sides together. And then I'm going to match up those seam joins, making sure my seams are right on top of each other and pinning in the right side of that seam allowance. We're going to do that for both sides. Now, if you want to pin on the ends, you certainly can. I'm not going to because I just kind of arrange the points as I sew them, and that kind of saves me time. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch this with a 1/4 inch seam, press it open, repeat on the other side, and then we're going to come back and give it one final press together. Now let's talk a little bit about your final press. I am filming this tutorial before the fabric actually arrives to be sold at quilt shops in the US and elsewhere. So what I'm using is called CAD fabric. So that's been printed on a printer, and it doesn't have any of the finishing techniques that make this color fast. Basically, that's a long-winded explanation to say I can't get this wet. So my normal final step is going to be to spray this with a spray mister and then get a really great flat join without having to use steam in my iron. That's my go-to. I hate having to put water in my iron because I feel like it always gets gunked up eventually, and I feel like steam often will distort the shape of the fabric, which is not what we want for quilting. Now, the actual fabric that you guys get from quilt shops is good to go. You can use it, you can wash it, it's all good to go. This is just the advanced sample fabric that I have to work with to make this tutorial for you. So you guys are good to go. Spray it with the spray mister. What it does is it creates like an aerosol mist when you give it a spritz. Put it this direction. And so that way when it comes down, it doesn't leave blotches on your fabric. It just essentially creates the steam effect without using that. So since I'm going to skip that step here, I'm just going to give it one final press from the right side. And that really helps set all those open seams in place and gives you a really nice flat block to work with, which makes it really easy to assemble your quilt top later. One thing I'd want to point out to you guys is when you have your picket fence units, the points of this should be about 1/4 inch away from the edges of your fabric. That's because we still have to attach this block to other blocks within the quilt. So if they were going all the way out to the edge, then you would lose your points when you sew them together. This way, you're going to be able to have the points come right up to where the seam allowance is, because when we sew this in, the points are going to be right at the edge, and they're going to be absolutely fantastic. So if you see this, you haven't made a mistake. It's exactly the way it should be. So that is block 1 of the Kaleidoscope Block of the Month using Spotsy from QT Fabrics. Make sure you check out QT Fabrics retailers to see if they are participating in this Block of the Month program. This is a reorderable fabric line. It's a new basic from QT Fabrics. So you're going to be able to get this for a couple of years and be able to make this. So if your local quilt shop isn't hosting the Block of the Month, you can definitely find this fabric, and the full fabric requirements requirements are listed within the pattern book Kaleidoscope, which you can get from a local quilt shop or on our website, shop.quiltaddictsanonymous.com. All right, so next up, we're going to be doing block 2. If you are following along in real time, we're going to be releasing these at the beginning of each month. So make sure you check that out and join the course, and we'll do our best to email you guys when new ones are available. If you are finding this later on, then you could just binge all the videos and get this quilt done as fast as possible. All right, until next time, happy quilting.